Hello, I'm M. Jason Graham, and this is Writing. This is Writing is brought to you by mjgstorycreation.com. Go to mjgstorycreation.com and get a free story evaluation. Get started on turning your idea into an epic story today. So we continue our conversation about various story units, and today we are talking about a rivalry. As usual, we start off with, what is a rivalry? A rivalry is two or more schemes developed to achieve an ambition in response to a known antagonist. So, now we've added the idea of a long-term plan from the antagonist in the story. Previously, because of the scope of a scene, an episode, a scheme, generally you wouldn't really get to see very much of the antagonist and, more importantly, the effects of an antagonist on the story. But now with a rivalry, and actually as we move forward, so rivalry, adventure, campaign, and epic, you become more involved in the actions of the antagonist and the actions of the foils. They become a greater part of the story. So, with that definition as well, we have now 12 emotional beats that occur in a rivalry. And before we had kind of been doubling up, right? So one scene, one emotional beat, an episode, 4 emotional beats, a scheme, 8 emotional beats. This one is in between in beats, so that you can fit them in an hour. Well, I should say between 45 minutes and an hour and 15 minutes if you're talking about film or television. So it is just enough emotional beats to really get to know our character and how they feel about the situation very well, and also to have an opportunity to explore the character's past and kind of understand what their viewpoint is now, so that when the viewpoint changes or they go through their transformation, we have a greater understanding of that character. So, here I'm going to leave the definition up so that you can see it for a little bit. Like I said, 2 or more schemes developed to achieve an ambition in response to a known antagonist. 12 emotional beats. And now we're actually going to go over the breakdown of a rivalry. So what is the composition of a rivalry? Of course, it's going to be a bit longer. So, as we always start off with, so the first bookend. Next, of course, is the purpose. The introduction of the communities. So, community 1, community 2, and along with introducing, of course, the second community. And you don't have to do this. You can introduce the stumbling block in the first community, actually, if you want to, but I find that unless it's a comedy, you want to show the character positively with the first community. Again, guideline, not the rule. If it's a comedy, then of course, there's more comedic timing and kind of showing the stumbling block first. So here you have the stumbling block. So now you have, so there's the stumbling block, and then here comes the shift. And then we have, so we go into an adaptation. So the assessment becomes part of the adaptation, which is a series of scenes. It just depends on the story. But now what we have is, during that, a revelation. So we'll call that antagonist revelation. So your character is trying to adapt to the shift, and it's this during that, wow, it is during that adaptation that the antagonist is revealed. So at this point, your character has to manage their stumbling block, right? Then a third community and this one here, it depends on the length of your story. But this one here is optional. Because if you're telling the story in 40 or 45 minutes, there may not be enough time. But that's optional. So you introduce a third community. Then you have something, you gather resources. So you remember before now, when we were talking about a scheme, you kind of went through the steps of what the adaptation was. Like, you do an assessment, you do this, you do that. You gather the scenes, you show that you're gathering the resources from the communities. And so we listed that out. Now, because this one is going to be at least 15 to 20 scenes, you don't need to list everything out now, because you know as a writer what scenes you need to have for what resources. So we gather the resources, and then we have what I'm calling a conjunction. A conjunction is when your protagonist goes head to head with the antagonist in the story. So only one of them can win. So just like a boxing match, there's nobody standing in between. There's no foils or anything like that. Your protagonist in the scale of a rivalry, your protagonist and your antagonist go head to head. Only one person can come out on top. So you have the conjunction. Then you have the resolution, of course. And the resolution is the fallout of one of them winning, whichever one of them wins. And then, of course, you have the second bookend. So I'm going to stand so that you guys can have an opportunity to see this. I'm actually going to get behind the camera so you guys have an opportunity to see this fully so I'm not in the way. Okay. So, and I think that's good. I think you guys can see it. So, the first bookend, purpose, community, introduce community number 1, introduce community number 2 with the stumbling block. The shift occurs, the character adapts, the antagonist is revealed. The character has to figure out how to manage their stumbling block. A third community, because he or she has to go for more resources, because now they know that someone is actively working against them. So a third community is introduced, and they would only be able to really gather that third community after they manage their stumbling block. They gather all the resources from the communities. There's a conjunction, which of course means that our protagonist and antagonist go head to head. There's a resolution, and this is not saying that the protagonist always has to win. Depends on where your story's going, right? So you have a resolution, and then the second bookend. I did this before. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, okay, so now you have situations where you have multiple scenes, and this is only because I'm running out of space on this board, and I don't want it to be too small to where you can't see what's being written. But your first bookend, your opening scene, this will be a scene, this will be a scene, that'll be a scene. The shift that occurs will be a scene. The adaptation will be a number of scenes. The antagonist revealed will be a scene. The character managing their stumbling block could be 1 or 2 scenes, that depends. Here's your separate scene with an optional third community. Gathering resources will probably be multiple scenes. Your conjunction will be a scene. The resolution may be multiple scenes depending on what's happening in each of the communities. And then your separate bookend. So you are looking at 4, 8, 12. You're looking at least 13 scenes, probably closer to 20, actually, considering everything else. And then, of course, like I said before, 12 emotional beats. So, amongst all of this, your character has to travel 12 emotional beats. However, sometimes the antagonist also has long-term plans, and the plans are multifaceted. And since nothing happens in a bubble, the antagonist also performs an assessment and an adaptation and returns. And when that happens, a rivalry becomes an adventure. My name is M. Jason Graham, and this is Writing. This is Writing is brought to you by mjgstorycreation.com. Go to mjgstorycreation.com and get tips and helpful advice on how to turn your idea into an epic story today. I'll see you next time.